Welcome to the Women Living Well After 50 podcast. I'm Sulon Carrick and I'm passionate about inspiring, motivating, supporting and informing women over 50 to embrace this exciting time of life. Health and wellness in mind, body and spirit are the foundations for living well, but there is so much more to a life well lived. Each week, through conversations with my guests, I'll be presenting topics that will help us all to live well and enjoy life. So join me as we discover new ways to become women living well after 50. Are you ready to start living? What are you waiting for? Let's get started. Are you looking to make some changes in life, but you're not sure how to do it and why you feel stuck? Are you living in alignment with your truth? What happens when we don't honour our energy levels? These are the topics we're going to be discussing today with my next guest, Tanya Cole-Lesnick. Tanya has been a psychotherapist and coach since 1995 after gaining her master's degree in social work from New York University. Group therapy had changed her life. She has extensive experience in outpatient hospital mental health, private practice and wellness centre settings. Tanya likes to help clients to access and honour their truth, to change habits that don't serve them, and to heal faulty narratives so that they live in alignment inside and out. Her work revolves around intimate groups as the sharing of inner worlds and being human together in a safe space is what she finds to be the most powerful way for lives to transform. So let's go and join the conversation. Welcome, Tanya. It's so lovely to have you as my guest on the Women Living Well After 50 podcast.
Thank you so much, Sue. And I'm so happy to be here and excited about our conversation.
Yes, well, I'm excited to be talking about it too, because we're going to be talking about things like how we can move forward if we're feeling stuck, honouring our energy levels, living our truth. I'm really looking forward to our conversation today, but I want to just go back a little bit and I'll just get you to tell the listeners a little bit about yourself. And I've looked at a documentary that you made, so perhaps you might want to just introduce yourself, a little bit about your background and what led you to deciding that group therapy is probably more advantageous to us than one-on-one.
Yeah, absolutely. So I have been a psychotherapist and coach for almost 30 years now, but I was not always a psychotherapist or coach and started my career out as a graphic designer. And when I was in my mid 20s and starting my career at that time in my life, I was really struggling to have a long-term love relationship. And I longed for one. I really dreamed of being married someday, having children someday. And I didn't understand what was in the way for me. And this was more than 30 years ago now. And I felt a lot of stigma connected to the idea of therapy, even though this was New York City and that was probably the place on the planet that was the most accepting of therapy. I still felt a lot of stigma and was dismissive of my issues. I felt like that was for somebody with more legitimate problems. Mine wasn't real and I dismissed it. But with more time and my longing intensified and I really wasn't sure what was going on, I did open up to the idea of trying therapy. And I got a few names and I connected with a woman named Bonnie, and immediately when I first met her, felt very emotionally safe to share my story with her. I felt very supported by her. And that was very healing from the start. And pretty early on, she suggested that I add group therapy to the mix. And she did both. She ran the group and I saw her individually. And I was terrified about the idea. I was being much more vulnerable with her than I ever really had been. But I was building some trust. I was intrigued, and she said it would be helpful. So I really wanted to heal this part of me. So I went into that situation feeling pretty flawed. I didn't know what was in the way, so I had to make up my own answers until I went on this journey. And my answer was, well, maybe there was something about me that was unlovable. And so I went into the situation really sort of hoping nobody would catch on that I was unlovable. And I, through that experience, realized I was not alone, was with other human beings on their personal growth journeys, and found my own sense of self. I started to really connect to myself in a way I never had before. And so when I went back out in the world doing this group, but still doing the group, I noticed that people were responding to me differently. I was more confident, more comfortable in my own skin. And so men and women just gravitated more easily to me, which was amazing. And I met who became my husband fairly early on, and he and I just celebrated our 30th wedding anniversary.
Oh,
So, yeah, so that part happened. He and I have two amazing grown daughters. But what I didn't anticipate was how powerful it felt to me to really connect to myself in that deep way and learn about needs, learn that I had needs, how to take care of myself, how to honor myself, all those things. And so I decided to go back to school and become a therapist at that point. So that's what brought me here.
well, that's it's always good to hear people's stories and what they've been through. And I just picked up on a couple of things there. The fact that I mean, therapy, yes, I would agree about New York. Even in television shows and things like that, there was always people in therapy, and it did have a stigma, and perhaps it still does a little bit today. But I think that with mental health awareness, and the ways we can help ourselves, what the resources that there are, it is becoming less of a stigma. But I think you do also have to be open to exploring new things and what's available to you, and also not trivialize your own problems. Like you said, oh, I didn't really think that, you know, what I was going through, why should I be going to therapy, sort of thing. But you were trivializing, or not
Mhm.
admitting to yourself that it was important to you, and what you were going through
Right.
was huge to you,
Mhm.
and I think we tend to do that. We don't tend to, we always say, oh, well, someone else has got worse problems than what we have, or they might think, why are you here? So I think that that was, a big step that you would have taken to, first of all, just approach for an individual session. But also I would think that group therapy can be a little bit daunting to people, because you're going to be in that setting and exposing yourself and your vulnerability, not just to one other person who's a professional, but to strangers,
Right.
perhaps.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, even now, because I still love group and run lots of groups myself, I have a lot of conversations with people who are working with me individually to suggest they add group therapy to the mix, just like my therapist had suggested to me. And I get a lot of fear coming up and a lot of resistance for a bit.
Yes, well, I think people, can feel a bit embarrassed. They don't want to share what they're going through with other people. And I think that it does take a lot of courage, to go into one of those group settings. And I've been there through my husband, who has PTSD, and you know um, he was going to sessions, and they advised that, again, going to have a group session for partners. And even that was daunting to me because also what people were saying in the group, I was thinking, oh my goodness, well, we aren't as bad, badly off as that. But it was quite to take that step and go and sit in a group and say who I was and why I was there, did take a lot of courage. But, for you, out of that, you met your husband and, life opened up for you and you realize that you are lovable, which is, great. So you help your clients move forward. We all want to make changes in our life, and a lot of us do get stuck because of fear, or we just don't know how to make those changes. So you help clients to get through that stuck period and to actually move forward. So I'd like to talk a little bit about that and why you think we do have trouble making changes.
Yeah, I think we all have limiting beliefs, I think, is probably one of the biggest things I work on with people. And the patterns that we develop connected to limiting beliefs, those two get very entrenched. And I can say a little bit about what that is. I've actually been referring to those things more recently as energetic clutter, because they take so much space in our psyches and they can block our ability to connect to ourselves and to even identify what else we want in our lives. And so limiting beliefs are different messaging that we all got growing up in the families that we grew up in and the cultures that we grew up in. And we all have our own nuanced versions from our families, but there's a lot of very common ones. So things like connecting our worth to what we do can be one. So there's this idea that we need to hustle for our worth. Mine is I have one people-pleasing tendencies, and that one is that I'm not going to be loved if I set firm boundaries, or if I say no, or if I put myself before others. And so that was one that I had to unlearn for myself. Another common one is that productivity is the top way to use our time and energy, and everything else has to wait until we've gotten enough of our productive stuff done. So there's a lot of that we're too much, and so we're too emotional, or we're too expressive, or we're too strong, or we're not enough. So these are all very common ones that people experience. And if we don't know enough to name them limiting beliefs and that messaging that are not connected to who we are, they will drive our lives. They are the lenses that we see the worlds through, and they kind of drive the different choices that we make. But when we can start to tease it out and realize, oh, that's a limiting belief, that's an idea that I got from my father being a workaholic, or sometimes control is the way to be safe, is one that people experience if they have alcoholic parents, for example, where things are unpredictable in the home. There's all reasons that we get these messages. If we see them as that, then they don't run the show. But if we don't question them, then they can stay very entrenched. They can stay with us through adulthood. They can stay with us through our lives if we don't question them.
There's a lot now happening for women we're reaching midlife and beyond. And I think, there's a lot of messaging out there about the fact that we do feel that we have to be there for everybody, that we can't put ourselves first, the guilt if we do something for ourselves. And I think that it's slowly changing, but it's still such a difficult one to get over, that setting boundaries, that making people realize that you are, with all the other labels that we have, a career, mother, wife, partner, daughter, sister, whatever, we are an individual as well. and we have our own needs. So trying to overcome that hurdle, I think, is something that I hear very often from women in particular. And you know, it's slowly changing, but I still think that little bit of guilt always sort of stays underneath, and it's very hard to get past that one.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a big one too. And I think this idea that being selfless somehow is the best way to show love and earn admiration. And so it's interesting what you're saying about it starting to change, because I agree, a lot of this stuff is starting to change. But what often happens is we understand intellectually why it wasn't serving us, why it was problematic, why it shouldn't still be in place. And so intellectually, we can have an idea of where we want to go with that. But emotionally, it still can be, it can dysregulate us if we're taking a step that feels like it's going to challenge our identity in the world. We can get very anxious about that. We can get dysregulated. It can feel unsafe to do that. We've learned these behaviors to begin with because it felt safer to have them in place. It feels safer to take care of other people because we know that that's an expectation. Yes, especially of women, especially of mothers. So.
Mm, mm. And yes, it's as you say, intellectually we get it, but making those changes can be, you know, the stumbling block, because as you say, you're doing something completely different, and the first time you probably say no, or I can't do that, you're probably feeling so uncomfortable, but with time it becomes easier, and there are ways, you know, there's resources that we can use to help us overcome that. Now, with other work that you do, you talk about living in alignment with your truth. And, you know, I hear of people, you know, there's lots on social media, or living your truth. But what does that mean? I mean, there's a lot of things we say and a lot of things that people say on social media, but they never really explain it. They just say, I'm living my truth, or I'm doing this or doing that. And you sort of think, well, that's good, but what does that actually
Yeah,
mean?
yeah. Absolutely. I mean, I love that question. And it's tricky. And it's one that it's taken me a long time to answer that question as succinctly as I can. So I'll try to answer
Well,
it.
that's
Yeah. But living our truths uh, means really connecting to where our core beliefs are, what do we believe in, what's our energy levels, what are our energy levels like, what lights us up, what excites us, and kind of putting together our own personal combination of things and how we live that takes into consideration all those things. And so one example of me just more recently honoring a part of my truth, I mentioned that I used to be a graphic designer before I became a therapist. And that was a genuine part of who I was, being creative in that way. And I kind of left that field and went into doing therapy and coaching without honoring that creative part of me for a very long time. And recently realizing that there was something missing from what really sort of sparks me up by not having more creative avenues in my life. And so recently I went back into doing a little silversmithing class because it was something I had done many years ago. And I took my little box of tools that was more than 30 years old and opened up those tools and started to connect to that part of myself. And so that's just an example of starting to listen. What are some things that come up? Where are some longing? Where do you have some sense of longing? And paying attention to patterns. I also am somebody who needs a lot more rest than I ever really gave myself in the past. And so hearing that need and responding to that need by slowing down, by not living by the almighty to-do list, and instead checking in with my body to see how my body feels. And so those are examples of how to start living your truth. And it takes intuition. There can be real subtleties. It's not like one and done. We grow, we evolve. Stuff does shift and change as we grow and evolve. But I also think what we were talking about before with sort of that energetic clutter of all these limiting beliefs and other patterns that are not serving us, if we don't pay attention to some of that stuff in the way, we get so depleted in those patterns that we can't even connect to ourselves to know what's true for us.
Mm, mm. And I think that life can sort of stop us from living our truth in ways like, you know, you said you were very creative, you were a graphic designer, and you went to another career that was totally different. And because it doesn't matter what we do in life, we all have these people or things, responsibilities, all fighting for our time, and we tend to lose ourselves as we go along, and we actually get to a point in life where we think, well, I'm not really sure who I am anymore. And I think that's part of it as well, because I don't know about you, but for me, if I'm not doing something that's, well, if you say living your truth, if I'm not doing something that doesn't align with who I am, I know really deep down, but I might be pushing through because I'll say, oh, I've got to do this, or I need to do that, or I should be doing this, and I push the other away. But your body and your
Yeah.
gut tell you, you know, you just don't feel that comfort level, I think. Whereas if you're doing something that is something you're passionate about, or something that really is in line with who you are, your values, the person that you are, I think that brings a lot of comfort as well, because and you know, less pressure, because you're actually living how you should be living rather than doing what other people are telling you you should be doing.
Yeah, I think you're speaking to something that when we're in alignment, there's a certain amount of flow and momentum and
Mm,
synergy that we experience because we're in a space that we're not questioning. We're not spending extra energy saying, is this right? I don't feel like it. There's not all that chatter that comes up when we're out of alignment. When we're out of alignment, like what you were talking about, that discomfort, we can sort of know it in our gut, or we can speak to ourselves with a sense of like, oh, I don't want to do this, and feeling a sense of dread and that kind of thing. Whereas when we're in alignment, and it's not that we never have some of those feelings, there are definitely times when I'm about to go do a social activity that I am fully interested in doing, but I don't feel like getting up and getting myself out the door, which is different than when it's really something that's not in alignment for us. And so those nuances are really important to get more clear about, so that if I have that sense of dread when it's time to leave the house, but I know that I really genuinely want to go out and be social with my friends, I know to ignore that, and that it's not what you described earlier about pushing away the things that we do really want because we feel a lot of should and
mm,
going into a should.
mm, mm. Now, you mentioned before about needing rest, and a lot more rest than what you do. And I must admit now, I'm like that, but I do listen to my body a lot more now that I'm in my 60s than what I did, you know, in younger years. But you talk about honoring our energy levels, and I just wonder if we can chat about that for a moment, because I find that lately, you know, I do listen to my body, and I don't feel guilty if I want to take some time out and I want to have a break from the world for a little while. But that, again, that takes work. But
Mhm.
why is it important to honor our energy levels?
when we don't, it really interferes with our quality of life. We get depleted, we're exhausted, we're not able to connect even to things that we enjoy because we're spent. And then what happens a lot is people then do sort of mindless, distracting activities because that's all that there's energy left for. But then that also just we're not present, we're not connecting to our lives. Not to say that there's no room for that a little here and there, but if we overdo it with some of the scrolling or the watching TV or shopping. I listened to your podcast recently, and you had somebody on that was talking about shopping as a way to kind of fill that void. If we kind of are not taking care of ourselves, then we kind of try and fill in the gaps with other things that aren't really genuinely doing it for us.
Yeah, that's a good point, because I know myself, if I'm really feeling that I need a break, I'll tend to just escape and try and read a book or something. But you're right about just doing mindless things. There is a place for that, but also I sort of think when I started Women Living Well after 50, for me, living well is all about health. You know, that's the basis. But then once you get beyond that, there's so many things in life that we can be doing to enrich our lives. And I think that you're right. We get to a point where we're so exhausted we can't be bothered doing anything. We sit on the couch and watch something that we think, well, and you can't even concentrate.
Mhm.
So I think you need to just be mindful to bring that balance back into your day, where you are doing things for yourself that you enjoy, that are going to reduce your stress levels, and also, you know, taking care of your health and exercising, eating well. All those basic things we know go to helping us to be more energetic and more mentally well as also.
Yeah, for sure. And I'm thinking, for me too, you mentioned sort of the exercise piece. If I don't do it in the morning, it's really hard for me to add it in later in the day. So that's an example of really knowing my energy levels, and that it's something that I have set up in my life. So I'm part of a hiking group, and I go hiking a couple of times a week with this group. So they're waiting for me, and I know, and that's a way to kind of help myself follow through. And then I have other walking plans with friends early in the morning. And so I have that kind of stuff in place. And also work wise, my mind, as many of us probably can relate, is so much sharper in the morning. So if I need to create, do some writing, do some real thinking through about something, that's something that I do in the morning. If I wait until later in the day when I've done some other kinds of work and I'm really sort of my energy is starting to wane, I'm not going to be as productive. It's not going to go well. And I probably will take me twice as long to do. So that's another example of the energy, that the more we get to know our nuances and when we are the most, have the most energy and can do what we need to do to sort of be in alignment with how we want to be living, then there's just a lot more ease with that when we know ourselves well.
Yes, I agree. I'm a morning person also, and I like to. I function better in the mornings. I'm an early riser, and so the house is quiet because I'm the only one up, and I get a lot more done in a shorter time, rather than if I leave it till later in the day where I think, oh, I just can't be bothered, or that sort of thing. So if it's something really important, I like to get it done in
Mm-hmm.
the morning. Now, um, we were talking about, you know, you work with people about wanting to make changes in their life, and making transformation. And it's not easy to do that. But why is it important to feel that discomfort and vulnerability in order to make that transition?
When people come to me because they want to change things, what they're starting to work on usually is something pretty entrenched, like the limiting beliefs. That's what I focus on a lot with people. And those beliefs and also the behaviors that are kind of paired with those beliefs are so entrenched. Usually they've been there since childhood, and they've been there to keep us safe. They got developed to begin with because it felt unsafe not to do it, whatever it may have been. I know I talked earlier about some of the more common ones. And so when we start to go against it, it is new, it feels scary, it feels maybe unsafe. And if we don't push to start to get a little bit more comfortable with it, little by little, little step at a time, then we're not going to be able to change those patterns. They go along with doing something that feels a little bit scary. We have to do it and get that muscle strengthened. It takes practice. And the fears that got it set up in the first place are still get kicked up when we start to challenge them. So like I shared earlier about my people pleasing tendencies, when I started to push against that, I really did worry, okay, these people aren't going to like me anymore, but I need to honor myself. So here goes. And I would try and start to take different steps. And I had fear that the thing that I worried about, that I wouldn't be loved, was going to happen. And then it didn't usually happen. Are people sometimes not thrilled? Sometimes. And that's part of it too, is sometimes you honor yourself anyway, even if other people aren't so pleased with it. And knowing that you're going to say something that's not going to be popular to somebody else, but it feels important. Yeah, that can be scary to take that step. But as we take these steps, we strengthen those muscles, we start to stand in our power, and then it's less scary.
Mm. And I think that point too, about telling others what you're going to do, or whatever, sometimes those closest to you, or friends, feel threatened because they don't want you to change for whatever reasons they have, and so they can get a little bit not be so supportive of what you want to do, because they fear that you are going to change, and they don't want that. They want you to stay the way you are. And it might also make them look at themselves and think, oh, I should be making changes, but I'm not, I can't do it. So I think that that's another avenue you have to overcome as well, sort of in making changes. As you said, not everyone is going to like it. So you have to draw on your courage and strength to go with what is right for you.
Yeah, absolutely. And also, I mean, sometimes when we do start to change, the fit of people in our lives starts, for some people, does start to fall apart a bit for some people, and other people not at all. Other people will realize who are the people that are true blue friends, who are the people who really get us and understand us. And when we start to get more honest with ourselves and then with them, the best part is when we hear back from other people who also show up more honestly with us. And that's one reason why I love groups so much, because people are connecting so deeply and bring such an honest part of themselves, and realize when they go to that space that other people will do the same. And that's, I think, such a beautiful way to connect with people.
Mm. And I was going to talk about the group therapy, the power of group therapy. We've talked about that, it can be daunting and overwhelming and fearful to share your inner thoughts with others. But I'm sure that once you're in a safe space, perhaps you might not want to talk the first time, or it might take you a few sessions to get into it. But I think that, usually everyone in that group is being supportive of each other because they're all there for more or less the same reason.
Mm-hmm.
And that, I think, having that group therapy would make you feel connected, as you say, rather than being on your own. I think that if there's a place for individual one-on-one, but then you're not really getting a parameter of what others are going through. But where in a group, if people say something, you might go, oh, well, that's how I feel. So
Mm-hmm.
there's one other person that feels that way at least, I'm not on my own. So is that what you think that the power of group therapy is?
I think that's probably the top, like of all the things that are powerful about group. I think knowing you're not alone, realizing that you're not flawed, you're human, I think is so powerful. And one of the things that I do in my groups is as people share part of what's going on with them, I ask them to kind of go around again and share what resonated for each of them when they heard the other people in the group sharing and what. So it's not just that you hear, oh, me too, but we also share it with each other. Yes, I really saw myself in that. And yes, I really saw myself in that. And there really is a love and a connection that develops between the group members. And so it's not only that you're not alone, it's also people that you admire, people that you really like, and they're struggling in very similar ways. So it helps, I think, us all release the grip of some of that, the stuff that we can get into our inner critics about and decide that we are doing so much worse than the rest of the world and look how well everybody else is doing. And then you realize, oh, look how amazing that person is doing. And they have the same insecurity that I have. And so
Mm.
it really helps us, I think, release the hold of that.
And I think too, if you don't necessarily want to talk to those closest to you. And also, if you do, sometimes they'll brush it off and say, oh, no, you're not like that. Or they don't give it the same importance as what it is to you. Whereas if you're going into a group, I would think that everyone's going with a similar sort of purpose. They want to make changes, or they're wanting transition, or they've got the limiting beliefs. We've all got those basic points that are the same. We might be having different experiences, but I think that people going into that group would be more understanding, I think, than perhaps those closest to you.
Yeah, I think that's true. It gets complicated when it's people in your actual life. They're not going to be invested in a similar way, like what you're saying. And part of what we work on in group is what are you going to bring back to if there's somebody that in your life that you need to work on something with. So group can be really helpful in terms of having kind of conversations that would be helpful to have with people in your life. But that's a very different experience than this is what's going on with me. Oh yeah, me too.
Yes.
So
Yeah, and I
yeah.
would think perhaps that you would come away with different strategies that perhaps you hadn't thought about, because the people in the group are not related to you in any way, but they may come up with things that have worked for them, and so you can try perhaps take something that might work for you from that. So it's sort of an education and a learning process as well.
Yeah. Yep. It is definitely those things. And also sometimes in group, somebody in group might remind you very much because they might be an extrovert, like your partner is an extrovert or something like that, where you just get some new insight because um, you're not closely involved in the same kind of way. So you can see it a little bit better and it can help as you're trying to navigate what you want to address with somebody.
So there's lots of dimensions and layers
Mhm.
to the session. Now, when you do the sessions, are do you only do in person, or because of COVID, do you do a online version as well?
I actually don't do in person every other week actually is when I do my groups. I don't do the ongoing groups in person at all anymore. I used to always do it in person, but I always wanted to do it virtually because I love the idea of opening up to the world. And now since COVID, I just do it virtually and have continued to do it virtually, except I also do small retreats, and those are in person. And it's nice to kind of have the combination. Obviously, somebody has to travel or be close enough to be able to do the retreat. So that can get a little tricky, but the virtual really makes it accessible anywhere.
That's right. That's been a great bonus. I think a new way of thinking and communicating with people virtually. And I mean, we're talking today, and it's like we're in the same room. So I think it's wonderful. And for me, I get to connect with women all over the world who have fabulous stories that they want to share. They're inspiring, and I just wouldn't be able to do that if it was left to the physical face to face. The other thing I think personally is perhaps it might be easier to be part of a session and to open up a bit more virtually than if you are. I'm not sure if that's right or not, but I'm just sort of thinking how I would feel. And I sort of think, well, I'm in the comfort of my own home, my own environment, and it's more like we're having a conversation rather than going to a place and sitting in a circle or however you do it, and in a strange environment. I'm not sure what you think about that.
I think it can definitely go both ways. There are some people who are like, nope, I only want to do it in person. And then there are other people who it does kind of give us a little bit more of a buffer, I think, doing it virtually. It is, you're right, in your own space. And it's interesting too, when we are together in group, we get to see everybody's space. So it gives us a different kind of information that we don't get when we're coming together in person. I think they're both amazing, but I think you're right. Some people may very much feel more comfortable in a virtual situation because it's a tiny bit more removed.
Well, we're coming to the end of our conversation today, and it's really been helpful, and I've enjoyed chatting with you. Is there anything, I do have one more question, but before that, is there anything else that we haven't covered that you would like to share with the listeners?
I think if I could suggest one thing for us all is to make it a daily practice to get quiet at times throughout the day, to check in with yourself, for us to check in with ourselves, to really develop that relationship with yourself. What do you want? What do you need? And make that a regular daily habit. I would love that if that could become more of a thing for people.
Well, yeah, because we don't really give time for reflection, do we? We've got so many things going on. We don't check in with ourselves as often. I've got a smart watch, and it pops up with a mindfulness reminder. And I don't always use that, but I sort of think perhaps to get into that habit, it probably wouldn't be a bad idea to sort of have a little alarm or something to say, check in with yourself and how you're going, how you're feeling, that sort of thing, till you get into because it's hard to introduce habits and new ways of thinking. So I sort of use any tool that I can that's going to help.
I do too. I think those are great. There's actually two apps, one called Yap, I think with two P's, and the other is Mind Jogger. Both of them will set alarms at random intervals. So then you don't even know when they're going to come. So I think that you just tell it, don't do it before this time, don't do it after this time, and do it 5 times during the day or something. And then it'll make them random. I agree. I think I love tools, any tool that helps us really get into and build those new habits, I think are so helpful.
And that would be good, having it at different times of the day, because you could probably get into thinking, oh, well, it's 5 to 5. I'm going to get a reminder in a minute. Whereas if something comes up, and especially if you're having a bad day, it can just be at a time when you really need it rather
Yeah.
than waiting for a certain time that you've set.
Hmm.
So that's a good idea. I might have a look at those ones as well.
Yeah.
So I will be putting all the links to you to where people can find you in the show notes, and especially as you do the sessions virtually, that means there's no barrier to where people live. They can certainly enjoy some help from you wherever they are. But my last question is something that I ask all of my guests, and that is, what does being a woman living well mean to you?
Well, this probably won't come as a surprise to anybody, but a woman living well to me is somebody who really knows herself and honors herself. And so it is everything that we've talked about, and people who make it a priority to really keep deepening that relationship with themselves and honor it as they go along. I think that's the best way to be.
Well, that's great because I love the word honor. I think honor and respect go together. So if
Mhm.
you're honoring yourself, you're respecting yourself as well. And until we can do that, we can't really expect others to respect us and honor us if we're not living it ourselves. So I think that's a great way to live well, if male or female. But as a woman living well, we do need to look at all those aspects of our life. So thank you so much for joining me today, Tanya. It's been wonderful to have you and to chat to you about your work and just a few other points that we've brought forward that I'm sure that our listeners will be able to take away and use in their own lives.
Oh, thank you, Sue. I really enjoyed our conversation and connecting about this.
Well, that was an interesting conversation that I had with Tanya Cole-Lesnick today, and I hope that you've taken away a few points. I like the idea of the energetic clutter that gets into our mind that we need to change, the talk about, you know, putting a different narrative on our beliefs, honoring ourselves, and living our truth. So I hope that you've enjoyed the episode. And if you can, I'd love you to give me a comment or a like. I'd love you to share it also with a friend because I know that whatever we do here on the podcast is always worthwhile to listen to. We have wonderful, inspiring women, and I know that it's all to do with helping us all to live well. So that's it for another episode. I hope you've enjoyed that. And until I see you next time, remember to live well, enjoy life, and most of all, be a woman living life your way. Bye for now.